Now we're going to continue getting into the nitty-gritty of the course with a discussion of motivation. We discussed a lot about goals and introduced motivation a little bit, and now we're going to look in terms of motivation, actual ideas and actual concepts, actual suggestions for how to go about increasing the motivation of the employees in an organization. And this is the sort of thing that really we've kind of been preparing for the first seven chapters. Now there are many chapters after this, obviously, but this is really where kind of the rubber hits the road in this course a little bit. And these are all things that are based on concepts that we've already discussed, but we're going to kind of put them in more practical terms. And we're going to start with something called the JCM, or the Job Characteristics Model, which describes jobs in terms of the motivation of the employees, in terms of skill variety, not just having somebody do the exact same thing constantly, changing up their tasks a little bit. Task identity, of the ability of the employee to identify with the task and to understand what the end results are supposed to be and how to go about doing that. Task significance, the importance of the responsibility and of the job given to the employee. Autonomy, which is the ability of the employee to use his or her own judgment and not necessarily just be told everything at every step of the way what to do. And of course, feedback from the employer, feedback from the person who's the supervisor, the project manager. And so those are some of the things that we're going to look at, and all of these, of course, are important. Not all of them are possible. If you're working on an assembly line, you can't have a lot of autonomy. If you're the boss, if you're the CEO, you don't have a lot of feedback. But the thing is, to some extent, the maximum you can get of each of these 5 dimensions will improve the ability of the employee to stay motivated. That's the theory, at least. And all of these can be broken down a little bit. Skill variety, task identity, and significance increases the meaningfulness of the job. Rather than having somebody do the same thing over and over again where the person gets bored, rather than having somebody do some results or that they don't know the results are important, you have somebody do something that they identify with, that they understand the significance of, and that they change it up a little bit. Increases the meaningfulness of the work. Autonomy goes along with responsibility. The more autonomy a person has, the more responsibility he or she will feel. If I think that I'm just being told what to do at every step of the way, well, I'm not really going to worry so much about the success or failure, although obviously I'll have concern for my own job and for the company, but I won't feel personal responsibility for the project because I'm not the one that decided what to do anyway. And then, of course, feedback, which is knowledge of the actual results of the work activities, and these, comes from the supervisor. You did a good job. You didn't do a good job. This is what you can do better, etc. And a variety of these, adding to any of these, which increases these psychological states, can help achieve these outcomes. High quality, high satisfaction, low absenteeism. These are kind of the goals that we've seen over and over again throughout this course when it comes to organizational behavior concepts. Now that we have these concepts down, let's take a look at how to actually redesign jobs to increase the ability to establish or increase all of these 5 factors, all of the task identity, task significance, feedback, autonomy, skill variety. These are all things that we're actually going to look at actual mechanisms by which to increase these. You can use job rotation, which is shifting an employee from one task to another. That obviously increases a few of these. It increases the variety of the person. It allows people to expand their skills a little bit and use their creativity in a job that they're not maybe quite as comfortable with. And it also allows them to understand the entire structure of the company. Job enrichment, which increases the degree in which the worker controls the planning and execution and evaluation of the work. Again, it shows the worker more of what's going on, and it shows the worker more of the company's, of the way in which the company's product and the way in which the company's model works. So here is kind of a little chart for some suggestions, where you can actually enrich a job by trying to affect some of these models, combining tasks. In other words, having one person work on more than one aspect. If you're a company that does manufacturing and marketing and sales, and then customer support, having a key team or a group work both on the manufacturing elements and on the marketing elements, maybe it helps them in the manufacturing process if they know how it's going to be marketed. And maybe it helps them in the marketing process if they know how it was manufactured so that they can be as accurate as possible and in terms of the positive and risk components of the product. Form natural work units, people that work together and are friendly and work together well, help them want to do right by the team, so to speak. It helps with their task identity and significance because they want overall to not let down their teammates. Establish client relationships. This is especially true in service jobs like law firms and accounting firms. Sometimes meeting the clients can help in a lot of different ways. It can help with feedback because you sense whether the client likes and appreciates and understands your course of action. It's a skill variety. It forces people to hone their interpersonal skills. It establishes some autonomy because you have to, use your creativity and use your interpersonal skills to behave in a way that the client is going to appreciate. Expanding jobs vertically, again, increasing the variety of skills and the variety of tasks that the person's involved in, increases autonomy because, again, the person is now being asked to carry over lessons that he learned in the manufacturing process to the marketing process, and from the marketing process to the sales process, and from the sales process to the customer support process. And opening feedback channels, of course, allows the person to gain better feedback, both from the employers, from other people on the team, and of course from the customers as well. Some other ideas for redesigning jobs to increase these JCM characteristics include relational job design, which means trying to establish a relationship between the product you're producing and the service that you're providing for the consumer. Establishing, from the organization's beneficiaries means both the stockholders but also the customers. And if it's something like a nonprofit society at large, establishing that kind of a culture where you're working for the customer or you're working for the organization's beneficiaries helps increase the feeling among the employees that there's significance, really that third aspect, the task significance aspect, relating stories from customers, connecting employees directly with the beneficiaries. That especially works when you're talking about a nonprofit organization that, let's say, for example, is trying to find a cure for cancer. Maybe having them meet survivors and people who are helped by the products that the company makes could certainly be very important. Now let's take a look at some more examples of ways in which jobs can be changed to increase these 5 dimensions of the JCM model. Okay, so alternative work arrangements, we can give employees more flex time. We can give employees maybe not necessarily having to work exactly 9 to 5, maybe allowing employees to come in late or leave early as long as they make things up on their own time. Increase autonomy, increase the employee's job satisfaction in many other ways. You're being flexible with the employee. Maybe the employee will be flexible with you and work harder than necessary. Job sharing. Have 2 or more people split a traditional job so that each can bring their own creativity and own uniqueness. Telecommuting. Let people work from home sometimes. Again, to increase flexibility, especially if there's a long commute over here. Employee involvement means getting the employees involved with the management of the company to some extent. There's participative management and there is representative participation. Those are 2 different approaches to the same overall goal in getting the employee more personally invested in the company and in the company's products and in the company's production itself. And each of them are slightly different. Those are the next 2 slides over here. We've got participative management, which means allowing the subordinates, allowing the people, the worker bees, so to speak, the people working on the projects that are designed by the project managers, to have decision-making power with their superiors. So, not say dictating everything. If I'm asking somebody to do a video and to do an educational video, well, I could tell them exactly what I want them to say and exactly how I want them to say it, or I can kind of leave it up to their discretion a little bit. And allowing them to leave it up to their discretion increases their autonomy and increases their participation and their sense of responsibility for it. In order for that to work, the followers, the employees, have to have confidence in me and in the person that's giving them the orders. Otherwise, they're just going to go off and do their own thing and not necessarily focus on the vision of the entire company or vision on the entire product. And of course, leaders should avoid coercion. If you have the more you force, it's kind of a contradiction. If you force somebody to do something one way and then try to give them creativity, it's just it's a mixed message. You're almost better off giving the employee every step of what they need to do if you're going to try to force them to come up with a particular type of result anyway. And it's a balance, as we discussed before. You can't give an employee total creativity. You can't creative license. You have to let the employee have some direction, but you can give the employee as much autonomy as possible. The other type of establishing employees' extra task significance and autonomy is representative participation. Rather than having each employee or each worker look at his or her task and determine the best way to go about doing his or her task, you have representative participation, which means that the workers are represented by a small group of employees who participate in the decisions. Work councils, board memberships, redistributing power, decision-making power to these councils and these committees that are made up by the employees. And the idea here is it's a little different than participative management, where you say, okay, you're doing this, you figure out the best way, or you help me figure out the best way, or you use your creativity to figure out the best way to do this. Here, you have people from the non-management side of the company getting together in councils and making macro suggestions or macro decisions. And this may not be as effective. It gets people involved, but maybe not specifically with the task that they're doing. And finally, with regard to these involvement programs, let's look at it from the two different theories of management that we looked at last chapter. Remember the theory X and theory Y? The theory X was more the stick, and the theory Y was more the carrot. The theory X was that employees are motivated by the threat of losing their jobs or the threat of having demotions or their salaries lowered or punished in some other way. And theory Y is the idea that employees are motivated by their desire to accomplish goals, whether it be personal goals or goals on behalf of the company, both. And again, neither one theory is necessarily correct or incorrect. Both theories have some kind of contribution to make to the field of organizational behavior. Theory Y, which is the positive theory, the one that employees are motivated by success, by the prospect of success, that's more consistent with participative management and the idea that the more people participate, the more motivated they're going to be to make sure that the more they feel that it's their project, and the more they feel that it's their project, the more motivated they're going to be. Theory X, which is the punishment theory, the theory that employees are best motivated by not losing their jobs and not starving, that's more consistent with the autocratic style of management. Autocratic meaning that you have like a monarchy where you have one boss and the boss tells everybody precisely what to do and doesn't let them use their creativity. That's really more consistent with this idea of theory X, because if employees are primarily motivated by not wanting to lose their job, well, they're not really that motivated to be creative and think outside the box. Now, thankfully, I don't think anybody thinks that theory X is the sole reason, that people work. People also want to be creative, but just realize that if you have an employee that needs to be constantly watched and doesn't, just whose primary motivation is to make sure that he doesn't get fired, well, giving that person extra autonomy might not really help, because that person really isn't necessarily inclined to use their creativity anyway and take risks that could get them in trouble. The next half of the chapter discuss, I guess, the mother of all motivational techniques, and that is pay. And that's based on the idea that people primarily work for pay. Yes, they work for motivation, but they also work for money, and that's really the primary reason why they work. So The organizational behavior aspect of pay, as you can imagine, is pretty gargantuan because there's a lot of issues that are discussed when it comes to pay. And that includes what to pay employees, how to pay individuals, and what benefits, and how to construct recognition programs that reward good behavior or reward productivity. Okay, so in terms of what to pay, and obviously we can't come up with a dollar amount, you have to look at what other people are paying in the area, you have to look at a variety of other factors, so we're just going to look at it basically in principles. And that needs to balance the internal equity and the external equity and the strategic decision with payoffs. Let's go through those three classifications. Internal equity is, okay, what is it worth to my organization? That's the theory, okay, if we didn't have this employee and therefore we didn't pay the employee $60,000, how much money less would the organization make? Now, obviously, the organization can go out and hire somebody else, but here we're trying to look at the value of the job. And when you look at the value of the job is how much does the company need this job to function? What would the company do without this employee? What would the company do without this position? And you can use that to make a determination of what is somebody's worth to the organization. If the person is developing software, a software developer may, let's say, get $75,000 a year. But if the person's developing software that will save the company $200,000 a year, well then on an internal equity basis, the person's worth $200,000 a year. But of course, you very often you can get away with paying less than that because of the next factor, and that is external equity, which is the external competitive relative to the competitiveness of an organization's pay relative to the rest of the industry. In other words, aside from internal equity, you have to look at what can the person make elsewhere. Because if you pay the person more than the person can make elsewhere, well then you're making the employee happy. That's the good side, and you're establishing extra motivation. But on the other hand, you're wasting company resources because you can get somebody for less. So you have to look at that balance. On the other hand, if you pay somebody less than the person's worth in the industry because it's not worth that much on your internal equity count, well then the problem is you're going to lose that person because if the person's good and the person's only making 60,000 and they can make 75,000 elsewhere, they're probably going to go elsewhere as soon as they can. So, and then you've got a strategic decision. Well, with trade-offs, everything's a trade-off. You pay the person less, they're less motivated, but you're saving money. You pay the person more, they're more motivated, and they're less likely to leave, but you are spending additional company resources. Our next discussion is how to pay. And there are many different ways, of course, that an employee can be paid, and we're going to discuss some examples. This is not even an exhaustive list, although there are a lot of them on this list in terms of how to actually go ahead and pay. Now, typically people will get paid by the hour, or people will get paid by the year, people will get paid a certain amount of money every 2 weeks, but you can mix it up a little bit in order to increase motivation and increase, both carrots and sticks for an employee to produce. There's the piece rate pay plan. The piece rate pay plan is the idea you get paid based on your production, based on how many of a particular item you produce or process. I was reading a book called A Painted House by John Grisham about cotton picking in the Arkansas farms in the early 1950s. And in the book, people who pick the cotton, the harvesters of the cotton, get paid $1.60 for every 100 pounds of cotton they pick. That's an example of a piece rate pay plan, where you're not getting paid based on the number of hours you work, you're not getting paid based on how experienced you are, or all that stuff works into your production. The more hours you work, the more cotton you're going to be able to pick. The more experienced you are, maybe also the more effective you're going to be. But overall, it just depends on your production. You pick 500 pounds, you get $8, I think, something like that. Now, of course, that was a lot of money in those days. No, 500. Well, no, 500 pounds is $80. Anyway, whatever. $800. Okay. Now, in terms of then you have merit-based pay, which is the idea that people who do a good job get raises. Again, that's there, and people who are people in a company, some people are making more than others because they're considered more valuable to the company. You have bonuses, which are not guaranteed, which is the sort of thing that employees can't absolutely bank on in terms of their salaries, but it could be very motivational if people get bonuses or don't get bonuses, depending on how well they do or how well their evaluations are from their bosses and how well the company does. There's skill-based pay, wherein people that have special skills that are particularly valuable to the company get paid more. There are profit-sharing plans. 401k plans are one example. These are retirement or pension plans where the employees kind of, instead of getting a salary, their money is put into a special account where it's invested, and the investment could be in the company itself or other products, or it could be in the general stock market, as is generally true when you're talking about 401k plans. And then the employees have their share that they actually gain, and it can either be taken out as a pension under some plans, or it can be taken out even while they're working under others. There's gain sharing, which is the idea that the employees get a percentage of the profit that the company makes. If the company makes more than a certain amount, then everybody takes home 1% or 3% or 1/2%, or depending on the size of the company. And that, of course, is a very motivational tool. And then you've got the employee stock ownership plan, or the ESOP. That's the idea that the employees, rather than being given all their salary in money, some of their salary comes in stock, or stock options, which is the option to purchase the company stock at a given price. Could be a reduced price, could be the price at a particular date, but if the employee does well, then if the company does well, the employees will do well because they're owners of the company. It also increases their motivation because now it's partially their company. It's kind of like the owners are the workers are the owners. This could be a terrible thing, like in the case of Enron, where people had their 401k full of Enron stock, and they were working there for years, and then the company went bankrupt and their 401k became worthless. Or it could be tremendously great, as in the case of Google or Microsoft, where you heard stories of custodians sweeping the floors who were multimillionaires because instead of taking their entire $10 an hour in cash, they took 5 of it in company stock, and the company stock went on to be worth a lot. In addition to pay, then you have the benefits. Benefits means health coverage, 401k plan, maybe life insurance that some companies offer, maybe perks like ability to travel, even things down to things like Costco membership or BJ Club membership, or these are things that the museum membership. I think I remember when my father, who was an economist for AT&T at the time, they got automatic membership to all the New York City museums, and that was considered a benefit of the company. And this is just one of those things. It used to be more common than it is today, but it's a way for the company to do something a little nicer and foster an atmosphere of celebration of the company, so to speak, even when the employees have their off days. And so benefits can be an employee provision, which means required to give to the employee. It could also be an employee motivator. Maybe getting a full-time job with this company means better health benefits than either a part-time job or working for some other company. And a flexible benefits program, of course, turns it into a motivational tool where the idea that not everybody gets necessarily a full 401k contribution. Now, of course, there are federal rules and that in certain minimum benefits you have to give, especially with the Affordable Care Act that was passed back in 2010. There are some requirements that full-time employees get certain health benefits. There are also certain 401k plans where if you want it to be qualified and therefore get certain favorable federal treatment, you have to give everybody a 4% match. But you can give some employees a 6% match, or you could have a non-qualified plan that gives some employees a match of their salary into the account, and some that don't. So you can definitely use benefits to motivate, just like you use salary to motivate. You can also use something like employee recognition programs. They could be official or they could be unofficial. It could be as simple as a spontaneous comment, "You're doing a good job." It could be formalized in a program, Employee of the Month. It's very powerful because people like to be recognized, whether or not they're getting more money. I've noticed that people like titles, even if their title doesn't necessarily come with a raise. You might think it's pretty worthless, but people appreciate being put in charge of something and being put in charge of other employees, even if it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to get a raise. But of course, fairness is important. If employees perceive that you're giving promotions and titles based on randomness or based on characteristics or criteria that are unfair, that could cause a tremendous decrease in workplace morale. So some of the things we've seen in terms of this chapter as implications for managers. We've got to recognize individual differences and realize that not all of these perks and not all of these plans and not all of these strategies are going to work for everybody. Use goals and feedback with the employees to make sure whatever process you're using is working. Allow the employees to participate in decisions, which increases autonomy, increases the ability, several of these JCM characteristics. Link rewards to performance in order to motivate people to increase their performance. Check reward system to make sure it's fair. And so really, the come away from this chapter is that the JCM job characteristics, those 5 characteristics that we discussed way back at the beginning of the chapter, the skill variety, task identity, task significance, the ability to appreciate how important the task is, autonomy and feedback all matter. It's not clear that employee involvement programs work, and you got to be careful about which ones you enact and how closely you monitor them. And variable pay plans, including varying benefits, can also enhance the motivation of employees.